over to you.
So Reservoir train station, so I'm really pleased to be able to share with you. So just by way of context, so Reservoir Station sits right in the centre of the suburb. It's about 12.5 kilometres north of the city. It sits on the Mernda train line, and the main driver for this project, it's a level crossing removal project, so the removal of an at-grade crossing and then a new station. So the site, which is shown outlined in red, it's very much an island that separates the suburb. On either side, you've got 6-lane roads, so it's a really hostile pedestrian environment, very difficult to cross, very difficult to access the station. And on either side of this big divide through the centre of the suburb, highlighted in orange are the 2 retail high streets, so Edwardes Street and Broadway. So very much disconnected. The site also sits on top of some of the original water infrastructure for Melbourne. So the original reservoirs, which the suburb got its name from, sit right to the south, and the pipeline that connects them runs actually underneath the site. So this was the station as it was. So you can kind of get a sense that it was a very nondescript building, but very difficult to access. So you're essentially addressing the building across multiple lanes of cars. The station building itself, by its placement, it essentially disconnected any view between those 2 retail streets. Crossing was a very convoluted process, and obviously that was exacerbated by the at-grade rail corridor, and the rail crossing, I think, was down 40% during peak hour or something crazy. So obviously a highly trafficked site, very difficult for pedestrians and bikes. So our main design response and our aspiration for the scheme was that the station building itself could act as a central wayfinding hub, a signifier for the station and a gateway for the suburb. And through its placement and through its form, try to facilitate a much stronger east-west connection and act as a unifying element for these 2 distinct high streets. To the south and to the north of the site were also some pretty nice green spaces and green corridors, but the area around the station had been degraded over time, so the aspiration was to also replant and restitch a north-south green corridor for the suburb. So a series of diagrams just to show you some of the key architectural elements. So obviously the existing site as described, the station building creating a very strong physical and visual barrier, the 2 distinct high streets, and then the level crossing exacerbating an incredibly convoluted intersection as well. Elevating the rail immediately opens up, of course, opportunities for much better connections for pedestrians and bikes. And one of the key moves was the placement of the station entry and the main public space. So we created a public forecourt that aligns with those 2 streets and allows for a moment of respite for pedestrians moving from one side to the other. We then activated the north and southern side of that plaza with 2 gate lines, which seems like a minor architectural move. It was actually something we had to fight for throughout the whole process. It's very difficult in these stations to get more than 1 gate line, but we were able to justify it from the public benefit aspect of having a more activated forecourt. The station buildings are grouped to kind of create a barrier to the busy roads and then get a more calm concourse kind of sheltered within them. Because of the scale of the huge spaces of the roads on either side, we wanted, and it's 150 metres, I should just note, from building to building, we wanted the canopy structure to be significant enough that it could be seen clearly, it could act as that wayfinding hub and signifier, with a gap in the form to preserve the view corridor, and then a shaping of the form to further define that space. So this was the original concept idea, the idea that the 2 canopies create almost an arch and then taper away to the north and south to open up as a gateway for the train's arrival and departure. That translated fairly literally into the final long section. It's a very simple building in plan and in short section. It's the east and west elevations that are doing all the work, addressing the 2 halves of the suburb. This is that central public space, the 2 gate lines and the stairs that go up to the platform for commuters. This central space has also been future-proofed to allow for a future tram corridor. So it's the minimum width the tram will allow and the maximum distance that MTM would allow us to have a second gate line. So it's a highly contested amount of space. And you get a sense of how it sits then in the middle of the suburb, the final building. So this is a view from that central space. You can get a sense of the view to the high street through the other side. The materiality was also something that was crucial in defining the context of being uniquely reservoir. So brick was chosen as the ground condition, or the ground material for the concourse in shades of brown, referencing some of the domestic architecture of the suburb. The other things that were really important to the history of the suburb are infrastructure. This new infrastructure, but also the water infrastructure that's historically defined the suburb. So the seats, for example, are shaped like historical culverts. The screen itself was designed to reference a rippling of the water surface to give a more abstract reference to water. And then the new infrastructure, in particular the U-troughs, were designed to be not covered, not decorated, but celebrated. So everything underneath the U-trough is coloured dark to be more recessive, to allow them to be distinct elements that run through the project. Importantly, there's a slight undulation to the screen, which helps the idea of rippling, but it's really the materiality. So we fought really hard for it to be anodised and not powder coated. The translucency obviously gives it depth and shadow, but it's the anodising that gives it a changeable nature. So depending on light conditions, it can be bright white, it can be silver, it can be blue.
2 minutes.
And then obviously the translucency gives great visual connection, safety. It allows it to be more dynamic because you can see movement both inside and outside. Then within the concourse, we wanted everything to be calm and clean because you're coming across significant roads. So there's a lot of paraphernalia in station buildings, cameras, bins, signs. We worked very hard to coordinate it to make it clean. And then as you ascend up to the platform, it becomes brighter and lighter because we want it to be an uplifting commuter experience and not grey, which seems to be the default colour for stations. And then as you get out onto the platform, you get a sense of how light and transparent that screen is, depending on which way the light is, which allows for views out, which some of the other stations we looked at kind of prioritise the corridor connection rather than the east side-to-side views. And then infrastructure. So celebrating the very impressive steel bridge, bike paths and planting to try and reconnect a north-south bike path, reconnect into that green corridor. And then importantly, the infrastructure. So the dark painted columns underneath to allow the U-troughs, which are very impressive pieces of engineering, to shine, and then having the canopies either wrapping or sitting comfortably within them. And then the final image, so the station building really sitting, as that first diagram kind of suggested, right at the very heart of the suburb. I also forgot it's on a ridgeline too, so this thing is visible from everywhere. So a sense that it defines the centre of the suburb. It creates or allows through a visual connection and new public space that east-west link between those two retail streets. Once the planting kind of comes into its own, it will really help hopefully restitch this green corridor. And then importantly, it's allowing what's really great about the new infrastructure, and a lot of it's not great, but the U-troughs and this really impressive curved view to be strong elements in their own right, with the station building defining the civic centre. Oh, perfect. The first time that's happened.